All right, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Dell Boomi Continued Education webinar series. Today, I'm excited to bring forward to you a topic that always garners a lot of attention from all types of AtomSphere users. That topic is our Connector Sdk. So before we get started, let's take a moment to review the agenda for today's presentation. Today, we're going to kick off with some quick introductions, followed by a quick overview of Dell Boomi. At this point in time, a lot of Dell Boomi partners use the SDK, so we want to take a moment to talk about our relationship with partners and how we support them as they create connectors. Once the stage is set, we will move on to discuss what our Connector SDK is and what you can do with it. And this will take us into some of our connector development and best practices. The best practices section will provide the general guideline we respond to inquiries with about development types and recommended project life cycles. I've also put together a couple of development considerations depending on the type of connector you plan to release. And once that's complete, we'll discuss our newest addition to the Connector SDK, our Eclipse plugin, which we will preface our hands-on with a hands-on demonstration. Once the demonstration is complete, we'll wrap up with some reference material and some feedback information. So let's go ahead and move on into our introductions. So as those of you who have attended in the past may know, my name is Michael Frazier. I'm a member of the Education Services team here at Dell Boomi. I teach our Process Developer 1 course as well as maintain our knowledge community. In addition, today I'll be joined by Jeff Platter. Jeff is a member of the Dell Boomi Research and Development team and is the author of our Eclipse plugin, which we'll be releasing in August 2013. So let's go ahead and take a moment to discuss who we are here at Dell Boomi. So as some of you may know, Boomi was founded in 2000, and in 2007 we launched our initial version of our flagship product, AtomSphere. Shortly after, we were acquired by Dell, and since have become a key component in Dell Software's end-to-end business solution portfolio. Since the acquisition, we have also launched a new product called MDM. So the concept of AtomSphere is very simple. First, you build a process using our cloud-based platform. You then deploy this process to an Atom that allows it to execute. We also allow you to manage your process in our tool from any PC with internet access. This allows users to make changes no matter what happens on their system's back end. So it's important to take a moment and discuss the Dell Boomi partner model. Partners use our product to help their own customers meet unique goals by providing them with the best complete solutions. Our partners are also using our Connector SDK to help them meet business solutions. Let's take a look at what it means to be a Dell Boomi partner. So the partner network at Dell Boomi is an important part of our business model. We have had multiple partners develop connectors using our SDK, such as SuccessFactors and Coupa. Dell Boomi works with partners to help manage and maintain customer relations who use our product and provide training. Our partners support their customers directly. So as mentioned before, Dell Boomi AtomSphere provides a tool to integrate between dozens of applications, but sometimes customers demand unique solutions to complex business needs. Maybe your customer is running a legacy application and wants to migrate to something new. Sometimes customers need additional functionality to existing applications or want to enhance their own application connector. The Connector SDK provides the solution to these problems. So since its creation, multiple partners have used the Connector SDK to create a connector. Most of these connectors have been for private development and production. Partners have created new connectors for applications. And some of our current partners that have created connectors include SuccessFactors, Coupa, Aria, Marketo, Primo, and Inotis. So let's take a quick look at one of those partners. SuccessFactors went ahead and developed a connector initially last year. Once completed, it was evaluated by Dell Boomi and made publicly available this year. One of the points we like to mention is how SuccessFactors was able to meet development and testing projects for the connector. And since its launch, SuccessFactors has seen a 50% growth rate for new and existing connector implementations in Atomsphere. This is a great example of how the Connector SDK empowers our partners to do more with Atomsphere. So now that we've talked about who has used the SDK and what its business use is, let's highlight exactly what the SDK can do. So the Connector SDK allows customers and partners the ability to create a connector that can be used in Atomsphere. These connections can meet any requirement the developer sets. The Connector SDK allows you to meet specific customer needs. So how does Dell Boomi support the Connector SDK? Well, we offer a variety of different tools to support the SDK in development. Our most important resource is our reference guide at help.boomi.com. Here, SDK users can find release note information, change logs, customer connection permissions, versioning and release information, and much more. The reference guide is always kept up to date with any information regarding the SDK. The Dell Boomi R&D team also supports the SDK, both directly and indirectly. The R&D team manages our answers form, available in the customer portal, to offer any feedback to questions presented by users. They provide guidance and best practices, approve or deny connectors submitted to go public, and support developers as they manage updates and changes. The Dell Boomi R&D team continue to support the SDK in any way possible. So we spent a lot of time setting the stage for our Connector SDK. We talked about who Dell Boomi is, who our partners are, and how customers use the SDK, and what the SDK can do. So now let's dive into some best practice guidelines we at Dell Boomi encourage SDK users to consider. Remember, development can be done a number of ways, but these best practice guidelines are Dell Boomi approved. So first, when a customer or partner expresses interest in a connector, we share our development template. This template is used by the Dell Boomi team to develop connectors and helps identify some of the key considerations for those connectors. Topics like understanding the system API, authentication, object listing, error codes, and object-specific details are important to identify as early as possible to help create the most complete and accurate roadmap for development. We believe the connector development lifecycle is approximately 6 to 9 weeks. We identify the lifecycle in 5 key steps. As you will see in the slide, we try to identify the primary milestones as information gathering and programming. What we want to do is provide an experience that can help enable anyone who wants to work with the Connector SDK. The following slides are going to identify key areas the Dell Boomi team is focused on. It's important to note that there are a lot of dependencies and considerations that go into development. Customers and partners may need less time for information gathering or more time for programming. So the first step to any development project is familiarizing yourself with the systems. To develop a connector, you need to understand both the Dell Boomi connector code and the remote systems that you're trying to connect to. Identifying the target system and its requirements is also a key step. The Dell Boomi team puts incredible emphasis on strategy development. This step is unique for every development project and is necessary to define the scope and resources required for this project. After defining a strategy, it's time to code. With our new Eclipse plugin, setting up a project has become a very simple process. So once the code is complete, we launch into the testing phase. This phase allows developers the ability to publish the connector privately and begin testing in their own environments. And once the test phase is complete, it's time to release the connector. Releasing the connector publicly begins with submitting it to Dell Boomi for review. Once approved, the connector will become public and available for all AtomSphere users. So when developing, it's important to note some of the considerations Dell Boomi shares with our SDK users. It's important to define if this connector is going to be private or public. Private connectors do not require Dell Boomi approval. Once you have developed a private connector, you have the ability to share that connector in any account managed in your account groups. The developer assumes responsibility for updates and changes to the connector as necessary. If the connector is going to be public, it's important to take stock of the steps required to complete this process. The developer will need to submit the completed connector for review by Dell Boomi. This process is completed within AtomSphere itself. The code then goes through a security and code review, typically completing in a few weeks. Once approved, the connector will become public and accessible by all AtomSphere users. Any future updates or changes to the connector will follow the same approval process. So let's take a moment to talk about the Connector SDK Eclipse plugin. So this is a new optional addition to the Connector SDK we hope will help continue to enable our developers to be able to do more with AtomSphere. It was designed to help the Connector SDK user get started and will be available in the August 2013 release. This plugin was created by Dell Boomi in an effort to continue to promote the SDK. So I'm excited now to introduce my co-presenter today, Jeff. He's going to take control now and complete a hands-on demonstration of the Connector SDK.
All right, great. I'm going to take you through some of the steps that go along with the Eclipse plugin that we've created. That will include where to download the Connector SDK, how to set up the Eclipse plugin within Eclipse. Then we'll go through using it briefly. And then I'll show you a demo connector, and we'll go through the process of how you would push that up into AtomSphere and even how you would submit it for review. Okay, so the first step is you're going to want to log into AtomSphere. Once in the tab up top here, you can go to the Setup Developer tab. You'll have to submit all your publisher information if you haven't done so, and also agree to the SDK usage agreements. But once that's completed, you'll be able to download the Connector SDK via the link provided. Once the download is complete, we're going to take that, extract it, and place it in a location where the Eclipse plugin will know how to use it. While that's downloading, just to give you a brief overview, if you're not familiar with this screen, this is also where we're going to be coming back to add connectors later, and this is where you can manage the release cycle. All the information you need about this screen is documented out on our help.boomi.com under versioning and releasing connectors. So if you need any more details of what we go into, there's definitely a lot more out there on help.boomi.com. Great, so that's been now downloaded. If you open it up, you'll notice that within it, it's got a bunch of folders, including some of our SOA framework, as well as all the jars that are needed for developing a connector. The API util, the test util. You actually include a demo connector, a full demo connector, full source, as well as XSDs that describe the connector descriptor and the connector config file that you'll have to create. Again, for more information on these files, our help site lists out exactly what files are included, as well as a brief description of each one and links to things such as Java Doc. So I'm going to go ahead and extract this data out and put it into a local folder where I maintain my Connector SDK. Now the Eclipse plugin we've created, we suggest that you use the Eclipse IDE for Java developers. We're going to be, during this demo, we're going to be using the Kepler version of Eclipse, which is currently the most up-to-date version of Eclipse. So I'm going to go ahead and start that up. And the reason we suggest the Java is it comes with all the Java plugins that are needed, as well as some XML editors that make editing the connector descriptor and the connector config a little bit easier. Once Eclipse is up, what you're going to want to do is go ahead through the normal Eclipse process of installing plugin. So you come out here to install new software. You'll have to add our update site, which will be available on our help.boomi.com once the release is created, as well as documentation on exactly how to do this process in case you need more assistance. So I'll select Dell Boomi. You'll see that there's one plugin that's available. It's our Dell Boomi Connector SDK tools. Go ahead and select that one. That's going to go through and start the download process and follow through the normal flow of installing any plugin. We do have a brief license agreement. Go ahead and accept that. It's going to give you the security warning that you're installing stuff from us. Go ahead and accept that. Once the installation process is finished, it's going to ask you to restart. So you should go ahead and restart Eclipse just to make sure that the plugin gets completely installed. Now the plugin has a few pieces. The first piece is a preference. So as this is loading up, I'll give you a brief overview. You have a preference, then we have the ability to create a new connector project, and then we also have the ability to actually export the connector into the required file structure that's needed in order to upload into Atmosphere. So the first thing you're going to want to do is come into your preferences, and you'll see there's a new Dell Boomi category with an SDK location. This is where you're going to point to where you just extracted the SDK to. So I'm going to go ahead and browse out to where I extracted that to. And you'll see that it goes ahead and it parses that directory structure. It tells you the version of the connector that you're now going, or the SDK that you're going to be linked to. So we're going to go into 1.1.12. And then it tells you that it's found all of the files that it needs. So it needs to find these 3 jar files and 3 schema files. If any of them are missing, you'll have little arrows inside saying that it's missing, and you'll know that you have to possibly either re-download the SDK if maybe it got corrupted along the way, or just figure out where those files are on your hard drive. Once you have the preference set up, you go ahead and exit out of there. The next feature of the Eclipse plugin is the ability to actually create and stub out an entire connector for you. That follows a similar path to most Eclipse projects, where you can go ahead and go into the New menu. We're going to select Other, and you'll see that there's a Dell Boomi category that's created. Go ahead and select Dell Boomi Connector. Next. That's going to fire up a wizard. So the wizard has only a few fields you have to worry about. The first one is a connector name. This is the name that you're going to want to give your connector, and it has to be safe to be used as a Java class name. It's basically going to be taken and appended to all the browser classes and operation classes, prepended as it may be, to give unique names for them. So for our example, we'll go ahead and just call it SDK demo. The project name is solely the name that they're going to give the Eclipse project. So if you look over here on the left, this one's demos, one of the ones I have already. It's just going to be used solely for Eclipse reasons. So you can call it whatever you want or keep it the same. Third thing you need is a valid Java project or a Java package. So I'm just going to type in some example. You can choose to use the default location, which will store your code in your workspace, or you can browse to a specific location on your drive. And then the last option is that you're going to select which operations your connector is going to support. So before you get into the development, you're going to want to investigate and design out your idea of what your connector is going to do. Is it going to do a get, which is fetching by a single ID? Is it going to be able to do querying of some sort? Are you going to be able to delete objects, create objects, so on and so forth? So once you've determined that, you can go ahead and check the ones you want. In this case, I'm just going to check them all just so we can see all the classes that possibly could be generated. Once you've checked those, click Finish. And at this point, it's going to go ahead and build out your connector project. So you'll see over here, created a new Eclipse project, SDK demo. Underneath that, it's created the source files, some resource files. It built out a temporary spot for you to put some tests. You'll notice that there is a Dell Boomi class loader container within there. If you expand that, you're going to see that it references 3 of the jar files that you've maintained in your SDK demo location, or in your SDK where you extracted the SDK to. That's being mapped through that preference. And then if you expand the source, you'll see that it's actually going to stub out all the Java classes that are required by the SDK. Obviously, you might add more utility classes. There are some optional SDK classes that you might get into implementing at some point. But the basic ones are all stubbed out for you, and they're actually set up to be able to reference each other as well. The last thing it stubs out are the 2 XML files that are required for any connector. The connector config, which most likely you won't have to update once it's created here automatically. This just describes the entry point into the connector, so it tells where the actual connector class is. The only thing you might have to change in here is, 1, if you rename that class, and 2, if you wanted to use some new features from a newer API that comes out down the road, you might have to update the API version to save. The second XML file is the descriptor file. You can find out a lot about the descriptor file on help, but this is the file that describes the entire connector. It says which operations are supported, what kind of querying is available, what fields are available on the connection and operations, as well as supplying default values. One of the nice features of the plugin is that because we've linked in the XSDs, you also have, if you're using the XML editors, you have auto-completion. So you'll see that as you go ahead and control spacebar on here, you'll see that you're able to be presented with different options for building up your descriptor, which makes it a little bit easier to make sure you're generating valid descriptor. I'll show a little bit more detailed one when we actually look at the demo connector. The final thing, as I mentioned, is all the Java code. The first thing to look at is the browser. The browser itself is the class that's kind of responsible for relaying back to Atosphere what kind of objects, what types you have available, as well as what their definitions are. So this is the class that gets called during the import phase of an operation. You get those 2 pieces back. The first one, having you select an object that you want, and the second one, building out the actual request profile. So this is the class that's responsible for that piece. And you'll have to implement the 2 objects were mentioned and possibly other help. The connector class, as I mentioned before, is the entry point into the connector. So this describes out all the different operations that are available, and it links into your implementations. It also has a helper method on the bottom for creating a connection based off of our using. It basically just wraps up our connection and passes it into each of the demos. You don't have to override all these methods if you're not implementing the actual operations. You only have to override the ones that you're making available. The others, by default, will just throw an illegal arc if they're not available, or an unsupported operation. The connection class is a class that is shared and passed into each of the operations. So we often use this class for maintaining common functionality, maintaining credentials, stuff like that. If you have a login, log out functionality, you can put that in here. If you're always making HTTP GET requests or something like that, and you have something generic, you can pass it in here because this object is passed into each operation, so it's very easy to access. You don't have to worry about creating your own util class. The final bunch of classes here are all your operation classes. They all look fairly similar. I'll open up one here to show you, but they're all going to have some sort of execute where you're going to get in the request data and you're going to have to write out the response data. So for each document coming in, you're going to pull it out of the request, send it off into your service through the API that you're interacting with, get some sort of response, and have to update the response object to say whether that document passed, failed. If it has a return, you're going to put the return documents back in on the response, and that's going to allow them to get out of the connector and into the other features of Atmosphere. So as I mentioned, these all look pretty similar. They all have a slightly different execute method. They might take a little bit of a tweak, but that's all explained out on help.boomi.com. So that pretty much wraps up what gets auto-generated for you. So once you have the actual code created, we'll open up this demo one that I have here. This project is another one that was created using our Eclipse plugin. It's got a couple extra files, but basically what this is our demo connector that is included with the SDK. So you can go ahead and see all the source for that as well. It contains the config and the descriptor. As I mentioned, I show you a brief descriptor just as a quick overview, but you can see that they can get pretty complicated depending on what you want. They're going to define all the operations. They're going to define the fields that exist on the operations or on the connection. These up here are on the connection. So once you've got your entire connector built, the next thing you're going to want to do is make it available in Atmosphere. The plugin helps with this by allowing you to export the connector into a Dell Boomi connector format. So you can use the normal execute menu, or export menu. You'll see that there's a Dell Boomi category with an export Dell Boomi connector. Go ahead and click next. You're going to want to select the files that are needed in your jar file in order to be able to compile and be able to be used. In this case, we only care about the Java files. You might have resource files that you care about, so you might have to select individual files down here. You can go ahead and name the jar whatever you want. So if you want to name this jar something different than what the project name is, you can edit that. The next screen you have is if you have any third-party libraries that your connector depends on, it will, and they're part of the build path within Eclipse. We'll go ahead and list them here and allow you to include them in the distribution that's going to be going up to Boomi. In this case, this demo connector is only using utilities that are part of the SDK, so it's not going to show us any. By default, the Connector SDK util jar will be included in all the connectors since it is needed for all the operations and connector classes. Again, you can edit the file name if you want, but in this case, well, let's browse and let's stick it up in the SDK demo directory. We'll call it demo.zip. So if we edit that, you'll see the edits there. Go ahead and hit finish when you're done with that, and what that's going to do is create the jar file, then it's going to take the jar file, it's going to create a zip file, put it in there, and build out into the structure as okay, so we can open up the demo.zip file. Within there, you'll see that it's created a lib folder where we have the Connector SDK util and the demo jar that it wanted to create, the meta-inf that contains our connector config, so it's ready to be uploaded to Atmosphere. So let's go ahead and go do that. Hop back over to Atmosphere where I mentioned before. And what we'll do in this case is we'll add a brand new connector group. So a connector group allows you to have multiple versions of your connector. For instance, maybe a dev, a QA, and a production version that you want to have on, that each have different code versions So you can be, testing out some new fixes in QA before you push them to production. So to create the connector group, you need a few pieces of information. You need a group name, so we'll call it SDK connector, SDK demo. We'll keep this the same. I'm just going to go through and edit in this information. And then the important parts are the actual files. So the first one you need is the connector descriptor file. That's going to be actually in your connector source. I'm going to select that one, click open. And then the second file you're going to need is the zip file that we just created. So we'll go ahead and click choose on there. We'll navigate out to that location. And then I'll pick the demo zip and use that guy. So now that we've got all the form pieces in place, the last thing to do is to click OK, and that's going to go ahead and create our connector group. It's going to, this initial connector descriptor is how you want to designate the different connectors within your group. So this one's going to be a dev connector. The little help icon over here will give you an example of what you want that to be. So it's going to go ahead and create the connector group and create our dev connector within it. Once that loads up, you'll see that it's now added this new SDK demo connector group. And if we go ahead and select that one, you'll see that it's created an SDK demo connector that is a classification dev. So as I mentioned, we could go ahead and add future ones for QA or work prod. It's currently on version 1. It's private. And it has a few actions you can do here where you can change the name if you're going to go to public. You can make it public if you're ready to make it available. And you can select different versions down the road. Down below here, you have all the different versions of the connector that have ever been submitted. So as you are doing updates, you're going to want to use this add version to update to a new version of your connector, where you'll have to upload the descriptor and the zip file again for any changes that you want. And all of this, again, is described out on help.boomi.com. So now that we've added this connector, let me go ahead and open up the build tab over here. While that's loading up. A simple process that uses that connector, just to demonstrate how we've been able to upload it. So I've got a pre-made process here that I'm just going to plug the connector into. So the process itself is doing nothing more than interacting with our demo service. So that demo connector that we supply with the SDK is actually communicating out to a demo service that we have deployed on a Google App Engine that allows you to kind of just play around with our SDK a little bit and see how you can interact with different operations. So within that, I'm just going to add in our connector now. So you can go ahead and drag in the connector shape. If you go in here, we will see that our SDK demo connector is now available. Once we select that, we can say we want to do a get. We'll want to create a new connection, and this is where it will go ahead and, once it loads, it will go ahead and bring up and show you that these are the fields that were described in the connector descriptor. So in our connector descriptor, we've defined that there is a URL value. We can leave this as the default. There's no need to change it, but I just wanted to show you that if you look at the descriptor, you'll map this back. So save and close that. We'll also have to create an operation. So the operation, as I mentioned, when you go through the import, it's going to communicate out to that browser class. So we will go ahead and import in an operation, selecting the connection we just created, and an atom. I have an atom installed. It's going to present us back with a list of objects. I've decided to interact with the greeting object. Go ahead and click Next. It makes another call out to that browser class, and comes back with the actual definition of the object. At this point, we can save and close the operation. There's one parameter for a get, and that is the ID field. And in this specific case, the ID field is going to be the current data coming into the shape, so I'll select that. Click OK. Map the connector up, and we're ready to give it a run. So that's just using our normal, test mode. I selected my atom to run against, and we'll let it run. And we'll see that it'll use our connector to call out to the demo service. So the input coming in, and then coming back from the demo service, we'll see that it was able to reach out and pull back an XML document. So let me load out that return document. And there you go. So this is the data that mapped to the ID that we requested through our connector. So at this point, you would be able to go ahead and test your connector and make sure that it's working as expected, possibly creating a QA version for your QA team in order to interact with it as well. Final thing I wanted to show you is that once you're ready to go to production, the first phase is the submit for review down here. So if this version was good to go and we wanted this to be able to be used as a production version down the road, you'd go ahead and click on this button, click OK, and what that does is contacts our connector team here at Dell Boomi, and we will be notified that your connector is waiting to be reviewed. And that review process usually takes a couple of weeks, and then once that's done and your version of your connector has been made public, you'll be able to follow the rest of the steps described on help.boomi.com to actually make it available to everyone. So that's kind of the high-level step through of taking the Eclipse plugin and getting all the way through to having a connector out in production. At this point, I'll go ahead and give it back over to Mike. We'll wrap up.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff. That was awesome. So to wrap up the presentation for today, we wanted to just take a moment to highlight the location of some of our reference material, the Connector SDK information and SDK download links, information available on help.boomi.com. And again, to remind our users that any questions can always be posed on the answers form, which is monitored by the Dell Boomi team. So if you have any further questions or would like to provide any feedback, please feel free to contact me at usbur1-training@dell.com. I'd like to thank everyone for your attendance, and I look forward to seeing you at the next Continued Edge webinar rolling out in a couple of weeks. Thanks.